Hello there again, everyone. Yes, at last I am back. I do apologise for the huge absence that I've had since making this video and my last one. One of the reasons for that I will go on to explain and talk about a lot in this video, because I have been snowed under with a combination of sort of coursework and other extraneous activities, as I just said, one of which I will tell you about now. And I'm probably talking far too fast because I'm very, very excited. Anyway. What I want to talk to you about is the fact that just over a week ago I had my first trip to the USA, where I went to visit my beloved girlfriend Linda, who lives in the beautiful city of Memphis in the state of Tennessee. And here are some of the things that I observed about America. We discussed this video and think it would be quite nice to have a sort of like British perspective on America from the first time, and think certain things that I found interesting and certain things that I liked and was struck by, interested in, or was a bit weirded out by. Anyway, so here are 5 observations on first impression trip to the USA. Particularly like the I suppose Memphis is deep south, but anyway, so kind of that area of the south that I will give you now. One of the first things that I noticed about America that's particularly unique to that country and is interesting in light of some of the stereotypes that we have about the USA in the UK and Europe more generally, is the amount of food that I got served whenever I would go to like a place out to eat, like literally any place to go out to eat. On a regular basis you would have an incredible amount of food, like more food than I could eat, more food that I could manage, to the extent that like within the second day of being there, and because of the situation I was going out for most meals that I was there in a sort of very, very American way, I could barely like manage 2 meals a day because of the sheer amount of stuff that you would be given like just on your plate, which is very different from other places where you tend to be like, oh yes, this is my correct amount of food. But it's probably like for me that was more food than I could manage, but I suppose for someone who was used to it, they would have been able to stomach that more amount of food or have it in a different kind of way, but I don't know. It just seems very odd to me. The other thing about it that's very interesting is the sheer amount of meat you will get. In like the terms of eating out, which you can do for like breakfast, lunch and dinner quite easily in large areas of the US. I think I only saw large areas of Memphis, but I think it's a fairly general thing, having talked to other people about it. You'll get meat for every single meal, and not just like a little bit of meat for one thing. Meat will be the main thing, and you will have, okay, for this meal you get like 3 different kinds of meat, or even on things that don't necessarily have meat in them, you can often have the option on the menu to add meat to them. So for instance, like in the breakfast option, you can go and have nice hash browns, which are very different. Actually, I found them much nicer than the sort of rather boring, small, fried, triangle-shaped hash browns that you tend to find in England. In the USA, they're like sort of big collections of nice sautéed onions and fried onions and mashed potatoes and all of that mixed in together very well with lots of options as to what to have on them. But of course, one of the options is, yes, have this and then put meat on it. In various different kinds, like put bacon on it, put chili on it, put other things like that on it, in just... It's amazing the amount, it's slightly mind-boggling the amount of meat that is eaten regularly over there, which is just so much more, even in comparison to the UK, which is often stereotyped as a big meat-loving country within Europe. We still generally do not eat the sheer amount of meat that is eaten in the American South. But it was an interesting observation, but I struggled with how much meat there was for quite a lot of it. Observation 2. People particularly think of the American South, basing on what other people, particularly in America, have told me about other parts of America that I have not been to see, is that they are very open, very friendly, but they tend to be sort of quite loud. Not as like everyone shouts all the time, but in terms of the level of volume of speech that is common to most people, and in their willingness to engage in conversation with complete strangers, other people, they're much more gregarious and friendly, and they seem louder, I think, than people in the UK, who are often stereotyped as being sort of very cold and reserved and unwilling to talk to strangers, which I think has quite a lot of truth to it. There is we stereotype ourselves like that quite a lot, but I found people in America tended to be much more quick to be friendly to me, even though they had like no idea who I was, of course, than they would be in other countries that I've been to, and also in my own country. So that was in many ways quite nice, because you get that kind of like sort of like southern charm kind of thing, which I think that actually did hold true in many ways, and I felt very welcome while I was there, which is one of the nice things, even though it was a sort of fairly conservative area of the Deep South, even if it was Memphis. So Memphis apparently is like a sort of liberal bubble, as my girlfriend Linda calls it, in the otherwise solidly reactionary Deep South. But still, it had that sort of very nice, very friendly southern feel to it, so I will certainly praise it for that while I was there. Observation 3, quite closely linked to the previous one. One of the things I found is that in addition to like ordinary people on the street being slightly more loud, maybe slightly more opinionated, or like more able to be free and easy to share their opinions and stand on their right to do so. This came across very, very strongly in American news, even on, for instance, CNN, like in comparison to like the worldwide infamy of Fox News. Just watching CNN in Atlanta airport as I was preparing to fly home, it seemed a lot more sort of free and easy with its opinions, a lot more sort of loud. There was a lot more shouting and sort of very quick talking, like let's move on to the next like opinion thing, like or next news story, and see how sensational we can make it. It was very very different from sort of slightly more reserved aspect of the BBC, where you will probably never hear anyone talking faster than I am doing now, and probably most of the time it's much more the smooth, calm kind of yes, and in wherever it is now, and this is happening, and we go to join you live, that kind of thing. Which I think was just a bit of a culture shock for me, because I'm not used to having news shouted at me in a kind of, oh, you must really care about this, as opposed to like, this is the news, kind of thing, which I probably haven't explained very well, but it just struck me as being very, very odd, particularly as I was sitting in the airport waiting for my long-haul flight several hours later, with CNN actually on quite loudly in the background. And again, I think it was the same kind of sort of very different volume, control and culture that you get, particularly in that area. Maybe it's another American thing that you have, because you generally, like in other places of the world, like in Europe, usually would have the sound, like the news silence, and you would just rely on the subtitles that happened to be on at the time, or would have it very, very quiet so that it didn't disturb anyone, because particularly in the UK we don't like to disturb people. And again, I think it's very different from America, where it's more important, it seems culturally, to be able to, for you to be heard than for you not to be disturbed. So it's an interesting difference maybe to look at, but maybe I've got the whole thing wrong from my perspective, but who knows. Observation 4. There is an incredible amount of space and sort of a spread outness, if I can put that in a maybe coin that as a sort of hyphenated word, but it's very different. One of the things I noticed, like particularly from spending a lot of my time now living in central Dublin, which isn't a particularly urbanised area by European standards, but is still very much kind of like concrete everywhere. Not massive high-rise buildings, but like fairly like multi-story things everywhere, so you feel not quite like hemmed in, but sort of pleasantly covered, and you feel very much in a sort of urban space. Whereas the area of Memphis that I went in, which is apparently like much more like the majority of Memphis, is very, very suburban. So there's like a separate building for everything, often quite surprisingly large in size, even if relatively simple in construction. The roads are hugely wide, you can see everything for miles around, and even when you go to downtown Memphis, which is, like, as I've been told, the main sort of like really urban bit in terms of like having the large buildings and feeling a bit more sort of cramped in a kind of like European urban style, perhaps. That's a very, very small area of Memphis, and it's just like one particular area, whereas the rest of it spreads out in this huge suburban sprawl across the landscape around it. Well, I think it was again a bit of a culture shock, because it didn't feel like being in a big city. It felt like being in like a small town or a suburb of a town, rather than being in what is usually to be one of the large metropoli of the local area in the sort of Mississippi Delta area. But again, one of the things, of course, that is very different about America as geography is that it is huge in comparison to most European countries, where we are very small. We are very hemmed in by like political borders, farmland, natural features. America has spread out over an area like the size of our entire continent, and possibly more in terms of its amount of land area that is available. So I think there is very much that kind of mentality in its architecture and other things of space, which just took a while to get used to, really. But yeah, it is interesting. My fifth and final observation is to do with the word redneck and its sort of cultural currency, as it were. One of the things is, of course, before I came to America, I'd only really heard it as a slightly pejorative term, even used as a kind of insult or a kind of, it's a redneck kind of idea, often with sort of rather disparaging ideas about the Deep South with its reactionary politics and fairly strong rural elements to it, which comes, I think, of listening to Green Day a lot when you're growing up and living through things of the Iraq War, 9/11, all of that, and having that kind of cultural thing fed into you from a non-American perspective, and getting that kind of slightly negative impact on it. Whereas, of course, one of the things I found going to that area is that a lot of people use it to describe themselves. When you listen to the radio, you have jokes being made about rednecks by people who identify as rednecks. And I think maybe there's a kind of N-word privilege, not quite in the terms of like I can't use it because I can use it in a non-pejorative way. I think possibly it's almost been slightly adopted by Linda and her family, who occasionally say we're slightly redneckish in certain ways, given that they are from the Deep South and they very much identify as being Southern people in that way. So I think there is very much that element of pride to it, as well as some of the pejorative connotations that you get from certain other areas. But I think there is also a certain amount of pride. No, we're from the city in the South. We're not from like the far out rural sticks where we don't really know about the rest of the world and probably are slightly inbred and engage in all of that kind of like really stereotypical hillbilly kind of thing. I don't know. I'm probably also using the same terms. I don't really want to get too far into this sort of ideas of cultural appropriation and American culture, because I am not really part of American culture, being someone who is still very much European and not someone who has lived in the USA at all. Only visited very briefly. But anyway, these are my 5 observations that I found. I have other particular little quirks, but these are the ones I think I could talk about the most and would be of most interest to other people, either for seeing what the US is like from an outside perspective, whether you are from the US and wanted to see, okay, what did you think of it now that you came here, or okay, I might go to the US, what did you think of it, if anyone is watching this and thinks that. But anyway, I hope I have not offended anyone, and I hope I have done justice by the country of the US, and hopefully you have enjoyed this video. Anyway, thank you and goodbye.